Hello, everyone. John MELBYE with Become Demand Driven. And today I'm asking the question, how can we calm the chaos of supply chain? Never mind when the chaos started or how it became so chaotic. Those of us in supply chain have known the chaos of supply chain for many, many years. And though it's getting worse, it has always been a bit of a chaotic activity. But I think one of the things we need to do is start by asking the question, why do we have chaos? So let's start with how traditional MRP, material requirements planning, let's look at how that works. And I could say, well, let's start with this idea that we have a requirement date. At some point, whether that's a due date for the customer or the starting of a production, whatever that requirement date is, we have a requirement date. Based on that requirement date, we use the lead time of our components, and let's start with the longest lead time item, and we back schedule to say, if we need this component to arrive on this date, then we need to order it on this date. And that is based on the component lead time often given to us by the supplier. And we do that for every single component. And when we look back at that longest lead time, we hope that that's not a date that's in the past, where we are already late to place the order. It needs to be today or in the future when we place this. And the underlying premise here is that all of the parts, no matter how many there are in that particular bill of materials or the components needed to produce that item, everything has to be scheduled to arrive on precisely the same day. And what I noticed when I put the graph together like this is that we've got this huge area back here that I'll call the order placement gap, because each item, the longest lead time is the beginning point, and each other item has less of a lead time. Therefore, it has a shorter time period to order. So we have this large gap back here, and we have this expectation that everything will arrive on precisely the same day, just in time for what we're trying to do. Now, for those of you that have been around supply chain or even just living in the world, the more parts that we have and the longer these lead times become, the less likely it is that everything's going to go according to plan and that things will arrive on precisely the same day or precisely when we need them. So if I start with that as my concept, that this is an impossible scenario, then I said, what if we think about it slightly differently? And we went with the opposite and said, the longest lead time stays the same. That's when we're going to order that part. But what if we ordered every other part at the longest lead time instead of whenever it was needed to be arriving exactly at this requirement date? And when I did that, please don't suggest that this is my solution to anything. This is also not acceptable. But when I look at it this way, this white space moves to the other side and becomes our time to absorb variability. Because we know we have variability, everything's not going to come in exactly when we plan to have it come in. Now we have this time to absorb variability. And in this case, we only have one item where we need to focus our energy in order to get it to come in exactly when we need. And everything else should have arrived earlier. So instead of focusing on every single item, we just have one that we need to make sure hits this requirement date. And if I look at it slightly differently, let's spin this chart on its side and say, look, it looks more like a resource capacity chart. right? And this is absolutely anything longer than this, I'm out of capacity, or anything longer in this case, I'm late and I will be disruptive. So what I end up with is this white space becomes the time to absorb variability. And I know that, for example, this is too much time. This means I might be holding on to this part for 2 to 3 to 4 months early. And that's way too much time. But it leads me to the direction of the solution, which is to say, scheduling everything to come in on exactly the same day is not a recipe for success. And scheduling everything based on the longest lead time, also not a recipe for success. But if we look at each individual part and we think about their variability, their criticality, their transportation lead times and the likeliness that something will be disrupted there, anything that might cause disruption on an individual part basis, then we can determine that maybe this is the right amount of time. So this one I would order exactly at the longest lead time. But the rest of these would shift. And some would be up here, some would be here, some here, some here. But I would end up with a smaller white space of time to absorb variability if I adjust each individual part to arrive sometime prior to the requirement date. Now, let's move on to the next topic. And I call this the big picture problem. And when I think about the big picture problem, I've got two sides to this coin. Traditional planning, both traditional MRP and kind of our standard way to think about planning, requires stability. It requires us to think in terms of everything being stable, everything being set to happen exactly as we plan. And therefore, we think in terms of locking down the plan. We're going to make a plan, and maybe it's 1 week, maybe it's 2 weeks, maybe it's 3 weeks. That plan cannot change in that time period. And that would be our definition of stability. But the VUCA world, that's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, the VUCA world requires us to be agile. It requires us to be flexible, because the VUCA world knows that saying we're not going to disrupt the schedule for 3 weeks is insane, because if your customer comes and asks you to make a change, you're not going to tell them to go jump in a lake. You're going to try and make it happen. So the VUCA world requires agility while we are doubling down on trying to provide stability. And those two things by themselves are a significant cause of chaos, because you cannot do both. You cannot provide stability and get a resulting agility. On the other hand, being more agile and being more flexible, could that result in a way of being more stable and having more stability? Maybe. But this is where we need to be thinking. And let's look at our last situation. I'm using an illustration here of a simple burger joint, but the concept is the same. If I had a restaurant in any way, any kind of restaurant, and a customer walked in and said, I would like to order some food, whatever that food is. And if I said to them, that'll be ready in, my longest lead time is 30 days. That'll be ready in 30 days and 20 minutes. I would be out of business pretty fast. I also would be insane if I thought I will predict what people are going to order within a 20-minute window 30 days from now. That would not work either. So how do restaurants work? How do restaurants provide us food in a reasonable period of time? Well, the answer is restaurants have found a point and a way to, we call it decoupling. We've decoupled the customer lead time from the entire lead time by maintaining a point at which we have all of this inventory. Traditional planning knows about cumulative lead time, purchase lead time, and manufacturing lead time, but it doesn't know about decoupled lead time. In other words, we can't put it in the system as decoupled lead time. However, clearly this is in use because restaurants don't tell us, come back in 30 days to pick up your food. So what is it about this graphic that I want you to take away? The graphic is this. The focus in the restaurant business is to make sure you have enough of each of the inventory components to be able to react to the customers when they come in. And you've decoupled, so there's one side managing this, and the other side is managing the supply and making sure that we have enough inventory at this point. Now, most of us are not running the restaurant business or a burger joint. So the point for you is, where is this point in my business? Because it will be different for everyone, but everyone will have a point at which we can say, if we had this inventory at all times, then we could give the customer a different lead time than what we give them today. And it would be more accurate than what we give them today, because the one we give them today is all over the place, depending on what pieces of inventory we have in the back end of the supply chain. So think about, how could you calm the chaos of your supply chain by finding this leverage point and holding and ensuring that you have this inventory, thereby ensuring that the customer delivery will always happen. So how do we calm the chaos of supply chain? It starts with recognizing the sources of chaos. And let's talk. John Melby, Become Demand Driven. Visit my website at becomedemanddriven.com and visit my learning center, where I have all kinds of documents that you can use to talk through your business and understand where these sources of chaos come from. becomedemanddriven.com. Let's talk.